My son auctioned me off for $1 at his charity gala. Who wants my dull, boring dad? He mocked in front of 200 guests. I sat there humiliated. Then a stranger in the back row shouted, $1 million. What happened next left my son's face completely pale with shock. Welcome back to Dad's Cruel Revenge. Grab your snacks and get comfortable, because every villain in this story got exactly what they deserved. Be sure to subscribe and drop a comment. What would you have done in my place? My name is Richard Holloway. 62 years old. Retired. Widowed. And until the night of my son's charity gala, the most boring man anyone in that ballroom had ever met, or so they all thought. The chandeliers of the Holloway Grand Ballroom threw gold light over 200 faces, and every one of them was looking at me. I stood on a raised platform in a rented tuxedo my son had chosen, hands folded like a man waiting for a verdict. Tyler stood at the microphone in his $3,000 suit, grinning at the crowd like he owned the room, because that night, in his mind, he did. Ladies and gentlemen, our final auction item, he announced, tapping the mic twice for effect. My father. Richard Holloway. 62. Retired. Doesn't do much these days. A ripple of laughter moved through the tables. I kept my face still. Who wants my boring dad? He said, and the room erupted instantly. Someone actually clapped. A woman at table 6 laughed so hard she spilled champagne on her sleeve. Tyler leaned into the mic, clearly milking it. Come on, he's practically furniture at this point. Somebody give me a bid before I take him home again for free. The auctioneer, visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. Do I hear $1 for this gentleman? A hand shot up near the bar. $1, a man called out, laughing loudly. Sold. Tyler shouted, slamming his palm on the podium. $1 for Dad, everybody. The applause felt like static burning in my ears. I sat back down, chest tight, jaw locked, 200 strangers still chuckling around me. I did not move. I did not speak. I simply watched my son take his bow, unaware that in exactly 90 seconds, everything he believed about his father was about to collapse completely. Nobody in that ballroom knew who I actually was, and that was exactly how I had planned it for 30 years. To the neighborhood, I was Richard Holloway, retired accountant, quiet widower, the man who quietly mowed his own lawn and drove a 12-year-old truck. To my son, I was an embarrassment he had long since stopped trying to explain to his friends. What none of them knew was that I had built and sold 3 logistics companies under a name that wasn't mine, using a holding structure my late wife and I set up before she died. I never touched the money for luxury. I funneled it quietly into a private fund that had, over 2 decades, financed the early careers of 11 entrepreneurs who had no idea where the money truly came from. I signed everything as RH Ventures. No photographs. No interviews. No plaques with my name on them. Just results and silence. Tyler grew up believing his father was simply unremarkable, and I let him believe it, because a boy who respects his father for money never respects his father at all. I wanted him to love me, not my balance sheet. Instead, somewhere between his MBA and his Manhattan penthouse, he decided I was a liability to be managed, a joke to be told at a charity gala in front of 200 people who wrote checks larger than my old salary ever was. I sat there that night, having just been sold for $1 by my own son, and I felt something inside me go very, very cold. The silence was finally ending. The auctioneer had already moved to close out the segment when it happened. A chair scraped hard against the marble floor. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood up near the back row, an untouched glass of scotch in his hand. The room turned, mildly annoyed at the sudden interruption. Wait, he said, his voice cutting clean through the chatter. I'd like to bid. Tyler laughed into the mic. Sir, it's already sold. $1. Somebody already. $1 million, the man said. The room went completely silent. Not a cough. Not a glass clinking. 200 people froze mid-motion, staring at a stranger none of them recognized. Tyler's smile cracked at the edges, uncertain now whether this was a joke. I'm sorry, Tyler said, forcing a laugh. Did you say $1 million, the man repeated, calmer now, for Richard Holloway. He said my full name like he had known me for years. I hadn't seen his face clearly yet, but something about the cadence of his voice pulled at a memory buried deep, something from almost 20 years ago. Tyler's eyes darted to me, then back to the stranger, searching for a punchline that wasn't coming. The Gala's director rushed toward the microphone, flustered, unsure whether to laugh along or take this seriously. Sir, this is highly unusual, we don't typically. I'm serious, the man said, stepping fully into the light. And I'd like everyone in this room to understand exactly who they've been laughing at tonight. Tyler's hand slowly lowered the microphone. His face had gone the color of the white tablecloth in front of him. I finally saw his face clearly under the ballroom lights, and my chest tightened in a way it hadn't tightened in years. Marcus Vance. 22, the last time I'd seen him, sitting in a stalled delivery van on Route 9, 3 days from losing absolutely everything, including his life. Now he was easily worth more than everyone in that room combined, and he was walking straight toward the stage, ignoring the murmurs rippling around him. Most of you don't know this man, Marcus said to the crowd, gesturing at me without looking away. You just watched his own son sell him for $1 and call him boring. I'd like to correct the record. Tyler stood frozen at the podium, microphone forgotten in his hand. 20 years ago, Marcus continued, I was broke, sleeping in my delivery van, 3 payments behind on a business about to be repossessed. A stranger pulled over on the highway, gave me $800 in cash, and told me one thing, pay it forward when you can, and never tell anyone my name. He paused. That stranger was Richard Holloway. Gasps moved through the tables like wind through wheat. Tyler's mouth opened, then closed. What none of you know, Marcus said, turning fully toward my son now, is that this quiet man built and anonymously funded 11 companies, mine included, through something called RH Ventures. I've spent 6 years trying to find out who was behind that name. Tonight, by pure coincidence, I found him being sold like scrap at his own son's charity auction. Tyler's face had drained of every ounce of color. Chaos moved through the ballroom in slow motion. Phones came out. Whispers turned into open conversation. Someone near the front stood up and started clapping, and within seconds, half the room joined in, applauding a man they'd been mocking 90 seconds earlier. RH Ventures funded my startup, a woman near table 4 said, standing abruptly. I've been trying to thank whoever that was for years. Another man rose. They funded my restaurant chain after the fire. I never knew the name behind it either. Marcus held up a hand for silence, and remarkably, the room gave it to him. Richard Holloway didn't want credit. He didn't want a building with his name on it. He wanted results, and people succeeding without owing him anything but their own effort forward. That's not boring. That's the rarest kind of man alive. I stood slowly from my chair, every eye in the ballroom now locked on me instead of my son. Tyler hadn't moved from the podium. His hand still gripped the stand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Dad, he said quietly, the word barely making it past his lips, I didn't know. No, I said, my voice steady, carrying easily across the silent room. You didn't ask. The Gala director, sensing history being made, quietly signaled the photographer to keep shooting. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder, the very same shoulder he'd once cried into on a Pennsylvania highway 2 decades earlier. I owe this man everything, Marcus said to the crowd. And tonight, I intend to make sure everyone here understands that. Tyler still hadn't moved. 10 minutes later, I stood in the Gala's private green room with Tyler, the two of us alone together for the first time since the auction had ended completely. The applause outside had died into a low, curious murmur. My son sat on the edge of a folding chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it owed him an explanation. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked, not looking up. Would it have mattered? I said. Would you have respected me, or just my balance sheet? He didn't answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I built RH Ventures so people would be judged on what they did with the help, not on who gave it, I said. You were supposed to be the one person in my life who loved me without needing a reason on paper. Instead, you needed a reason before you'd even try. I'm your son, he said, voice cracking. I didn't sell you because I hate you. It was a joke. A stupid, stupid joke. You sold your father for $1 in front of 200 people, I said, and called him boring while doing it. That wasn't a joke, Tyler. That was a confession. You've believed I was worthless for years. Tonight, you just said it out loud. He finally looked up, eyes red, jaw tight. What happens now? I studied him for a long moment, the boy I had raised now looking like the child he still was underneath the tailored suit. Now, I said quietly, you find out exactly what $1 actually costs. What Tyler didn't know, standing quietly in that green room, was that his company, Holloway Digital Media, wasn't nearly as solid as he always believed it was. 18 months earlier, he had come to me quietly, humiliated, asking for a $2 million bridge loan to cover a payroll shortfall after a client contract collapsed. I gave it to him under one condition, full equity collateral, structured through a private holding entity, signed and notarized like any serious transaction. He signed without reading the fine print carefully, assuming his father, boring old Richard, wouldn't understand leverage clauses or liquidation triggers. He was wrong. I understood every clause, because I wrote it myself, the same way I'd written 11 other agreements for founders who actually read what they signed. That loan had one trigger clause, default where public reputational damage exceeding a defined threshold, verified by 3 independent board members, would convert my equity stake from silent minority to controlling majority overnight. Tonight, in front of 200 witnesses, video cameras, and a viral clip already circulating with over 500,000 views before midnight, Tyler Holloway had publicly humiliated the retired, boring father who happened to control 49% of his company's shares, one signature away from 49 becoming 51. He thought he'd made a joke about a harmless old man. What he'd actually done was trigger a reputational default clause against his own controlling investor, live, on video, in front of the entire industry he depended on for future contracts. I hadn't planned this moment. But I had built the structure that made it inevitable the second he opened his mouth. By midnight, the video of the auction had crossed 2 million views, and the comments sections had already turned merciless. Business journalists who'd been guests at the Gala were already drafting pieces titled things like The Billionaire Nobody Knew and Sun Auctions Off Secret Investor for $1. Holloway Digital Media stock, held privately but tracked by 3 interested funds, was already the subject of anxious calls between nervous board members that night. My phone rang at 12:04 a.m. It was Diane Cortez, the 3rd independent board member on Tyler's company, the one whose signature I needed to formally activate the equity conversion. Richard, she said, have you seen what's trending tonight? I was there, Diane. The reputational clause, she said carefully. Is it triggering? That depends entirely on the board, I said. I signed that loan to protect the company, not to punish anyone. But if the board determines tonight's events constitute material reputational harm to Holloway's public trust and client relationships, then yes, Diane. It triggers. There was a long pause on the line. The clip has already cost us the Meridian contract renewal. Their compliance team called an hour ago. Then you already have your answer, I said. By 12:30, the board had convened an emergency call. By 1 a.m., the vote was unanimous, 3-0, with Tyler abstaining, confirming that tonight's incident constituted a material reputational breach under Section 14 of the loan agreement. My equity stake converted at 1:07 a.m. 49% became 51. I was no longer a silent investor in my own son's company. I was, as of that moment, its majority owner. Tyler called me at 7 the next morning, his voice raw and hoarse, like he hadn't slept at all that night. Dad, what did you do? His words came fast, panicked. I got a notice from the board. It says you're majority owner. It says I've been placed on administrative leave pending a governance review. This has to be a mistake. There's no mistake, I said, pouring my coffee slowly, watching steam curl in the morning light. You signed the agreement 18 months ago. Section 14. Reputational default. You should have read it more carefully before deciding I was boring enough to auction off for $1. That clause was supposed to be a formality. You said it would never actually. I said it would never trigger under normal circumstances, I corrected. You created the circumstances yourself, on stage, in front of 200 people and several hundred cameras. I didn't write that speech for you, Tyler. You wrote it. I simply built a company structure smart enough to survive it. Silence stretched across the line, heavy and complete. Please, he finally said, voice breaking. This is my company. Everything I've built. No, I said calmly. This was our company, built on money you never knew was mine, protected by a contract you never bothered to understand, run by a man who thought his father's silence meant weakness. What do you want from me? I want you to understand, I said, that the boring old man you sold for $1 just became the reason your entire empire either survives or doesn't. And right now, Tyler, I haven't decided which. The emergency board meeting convened at Holloway Digital Media's downtown offices 3 days later, and I walked in wearing the same quiet gray suit I always wore, no entourage, no lawyers stacked behind me like a fortress, just a single folder tucked under my arm. Tyler sat at the far end of the table, stripped of his usual confidence, flanked by legal counsel who kept whispering things he clearly didn't want to hear. Diane Cortez opened the meeting. As majority shareholder, Richard, the floor is yours. I opened the folder slowly. I've reviewed the last 18 months of Holloway Digital Media's financials. Client retention has dropped 11% since the Meridian incident. 2 additional contracts are now under review following Tuesday's viral coverage. The board has a decision to make about leadership. Tyler's lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Holloway, surely a family arrangement can be. There is no family arrangement here, I said, cutting him off without raising my voice. There is a signed contract, a triggered clause, and a company whose public reputation was damaged by its own CEO on a live-streamed stage. I didn't do this to him. He did this to himself, and then called me boring while he did it. I turned to the board. I'm proposing Tyler Holloway be removed as CEO effective immediately, retaining a minority equity stake and a non-executive advisory role only, contingent on a 2-year probationary period with full financial oversight. The vote was 4-1. Tyler cast the only dissenting vote for himself. His empire, the one he'd humiliated me to build applause for, no longer belonged to him. The story exploded far beyond the Gala footage within a week. Business outlets ran features on the quiet, anonymous philanthropist behind RH Ventures, and Marcus Vance sat for 3 interviews detailing how a stranger on Route 9 had rebuilt his life with $800 and a promise never traded for credit. 11 other founders I had funded over 2 decades came forward with their own stories, each detailing money that arrived quietly, with no strings, no press releases, no plaques. Tyler, meanwhile, watched his removal from Holloway Digital Media play out across every business publication that had once fought for interviews with him. His name, once synonymous with disruptive tech leadership, was now permanently linked to a single search result: CEO auctions father for $1, loses company days later. Investors he'd courted for years quietly withdrew their interest. A rival firm hired away his entire senior engineering team within 2 weeks, citing leadership instability in exit interviews. The penthouse he'd been so proud of went on the market by month's end, the mortgage no longer sustainable on an advisory salary a fraction of his former compensation. He called me twice more that month. I answered both times, listened without interrupting, and offered him no financial relief beyond what the board had already approved. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. A man who sells his father for $1 in public needs to understand, in full, undiluted detail, exactly what that dollar cost him. I had spent 30 years building quietly so people would be judged by their character, not their inheritance. Tyler had just been judged, permanently, by his. 6 months later, I stood at the opening of the Holloway Community Trust, a modest building funded entirely through RH Ventures, dedicated to financing first-generation entrepreneurs the same way I had financed Marcus 20 years earlier. Marcus stood beside me at the ribbon, along with 4 of the 11 founders I had quietly backed over the decades. No press releases. No name on the building. Just results, exactly as it had always been. Tyler wasn't invited, and he didn't ask to come. He remained in his non-executive advisory role, a title with no real authority attached, watching from a distance as the company he'd once run without asking a single question about its foundations continued growing under management the board actually trusted. Last I heard, he was renting a 2-bedroom apartment across town, still paying off legal fees from the governance review. I don't regret the silence I kept in the ballroom that night, and I don't regret what happened after. A man reveals exactly who he is the moment he believes no one important is watching. Tyler revealed himself in front of 200 people and several million more online, and the consequences that followed weren't punishment. They were simply the truth, arriving on schedule. Marcus turned to me as the ribbon fell. Any final words for the cameras? I looked at the small crowd gathered outside the trust, thought of the folding chair in that green room, and of my son's face draining of color the moment he understood exactly what he'd sold. Just one, I said. Everyone eventually pays full price for what they claimed was worthless.